This video will be part one of a series of recreating Facebook in SvelteKit for the sake of learning. We're going to call our social media app Basefoot, and by the end it'll have a lot of the same features Facebook has. At the end of part one, we'll have the database and modules for interacting with it all created, and the create account and edit account page finished. We're going to start off by creating the database schema for it here in a site called dbdiagram.io. I can use their format for creating tables and export a SQL command for the most popular databases, like the PostgreSQL one we're going to use. We're going to need to track users and a few basic things about them. Like we've done for our login tutorials, we're going to store the password for the user as a hash, and I've included location and occupation just so we have more to display on someone's profile. Plus we'll have a place to store the path or file name of their profile picture. Then we have a session table to track their login. These ref lines just link related columns together, so we're saying a user can have many sessions, and this will also create the constraints in the database later. Then a table for password reset GUI ID tracking, and a table for actual news feed posts. It can contain some text, and we need to allow posts to be public or not with a visibility column. Then a separate table for images on a post. A single post could have multiple of these, so you wouldn't put them in the same post table. Same with the comments table. A post can have many comments. Just need to know who made the comment and what post it's for. And then a table to track tagging people in posts. This will be simply a post ID and a user ID. Nothing else is really needed. And similarly, a friends table. Just need the user ID and a friend ID. And finally, a notifications table. When a post is made from a friend or someone gets tagged, we'll make a notification bell in the top with a number like the real systems do. Now I'm going back and adding the indexes for tables that have an index made up of 2 columns. And then we can also set some defaults for dates and Boolean fields if we wanted. Then we can just go up to export and select PostgreSQL, and it'll give us a file we can run to create all this. I'm using pgadmin to manage the database, so in here I have a query window ready to go. But first I need to grab a few extra things from a previous app. We need the lines to add extensions in order to hash the password and create GUI IDs. We also need to set the permissions for these tables at the end for the user I'm going to use. We have an error here the first time because the GUI ID columns here need to be changed to UUID instead, which is an easy fix. And now we can run it with no problem. And here's all our tables under the data schema now. Now going back into Visual Studio Code, I'm copying the SQL so we can paste it in a file in our new app when done. I'm using npx svcreate to make the app. And I'll include Tailwind CSS. Then I'll open the new folder it made in the current window. And when that's ready, I just save the SQL in my clipboard to a SQL file so we don't lose it. If we ever needed to move from dev to a production server, the schema will allow us to reset it up pretty quickly. First thing after that is installing any dependencies I'll need. This includes PG, types PG, the SvelteKit node adapter for reading the file system later, and node mailer and types node mailer to send password reset emails. Then I got a background image I'm going to move to the static folder, and then we're going to set up our folder structure. We need a commons folder in lib for any shared universal-like modules. Like this one we'll use for databases. You can check out my Postgres node video for the details on this file. In order for that file to work, it needs some environmental variables set. So I'll grab my .env file from another app and paste it in the new app. I just need to change the database name. The real connection info is in the env development file. So right here, you're just seeing some fake values for now. Then in lib, I'll also create a components folder. And a stores folder. I'll also create an interfaces file that will hold interfaces that don't really belong in another JavaScript module file. And right now, the only one is a validation error. I'll use that to check for errors that should be sent back to the user, like if they filled in something wrong or whatnot. Then back in the stores folder, I'll make a file that will hold a loading state rune variable. This will allow us to turn on or off a loading animation on any screen in the app. Also, there will be a toast file with a global reactive variable. This will be used for error messages to the user mostly. Then the other half of these files are the components that actually show the HTML when triggered. I'll steal these from a previous app. The loader just has an opaque overlay with the words loading animated on top. And the toast is an animated small window at the top of the screen that shows a message. It can either be red or green, and it goes away on its own after a few seconds. Now let's move our database schema side by side because we're going to be making JavaScript modules for each database table. If you watched my MVC design pattern video, we're basically going to follow that, with each table having a matching file that does the database work and holds the interfaces for that table. We'll start off with the users table by making a users.ts file on the server folder, then creating an exported function with the same name. In that function, we return an API object, and that object will house all our functions we can call. On top, we'll also make an interface that matches the table columns exactly. The first function that all these files will have is a generate object function. This takes in the row from the database and converts it to the interface object. Then users will have a getAll function, which we'll use for searching. It'll query the database using our database helper file and return the result as an array of user objects from our interface. Then a getSingle function for just returning one user with an ID as input. Then an update function. Before we do the update though, we should make sure all required fields are there, and I split this off into a separate function called checkRequirements. And this will go outside the API object as we don't need to make it available outside this file. Here we'll check to make sure name, email, location, and occupation are all filled in. If not, we'll return our validation error object. Back in the update function, we check the requirements like this now. And after that, we can do the SQL update statement and send the columns we want to be updatable. This query will return the row back when it's done, so we use our generate object function here too to convert it and return it. Then it's almost the same for inserting, so we can copy and paste and just change the name and the query. And this is also why check requirements is a separate function, because we need to do it more than once. We are also going to bring in the password in separately because we don't want or need to store it in our user object all the time. And then finally at the bottom, a special function to update the password. It'll take in the ID and a new password and use the built-in crypto in the database to hash it. We can now make a similar file for sessions. When I do this, I just copy an existing file and go through and change what needs changed. So we don't need a password change function or an update function or a get all function. And we don't need to check the requirements for this one. Then I use the search and replace to replace user with session. Then I just manually go down the code and triple check it. So the interface on top needs to match. So does the generate object function. Then we update any SQL and function inputs as well. This one won't need the requirement check as we aren't relying on user input. All the requirements should always exist. And that's about it. Moving on to the password reset file, we just repeat that process. It needs an update function to update it to completed. And then post gets copied from users. We'll change the name and make the interface match the database. We don't need to check requirements. Users will be able to submit posts without text, and the rest should be there from our coding. We have a few special functions here. We need to get all the posts for the user, like if you're on their profile page. Then we also need a way to get all the posts for the newsfeed, which will be all your friends' posts. I'll need to come back to this one and make sure the SQL here will actually work the way I think it will though. And we don't need to get a single post either. And then we go through and make sure the update and insert commands are correct. And at the bottom, this one needs a delete function, so we add that. Now we'll quickly make files for post attachments, post comments, post tags, and friends. They are all very similar. They'll just have an interface, a get for post function that only gets it for one post, and an insert and delete function. And then finally notifications, which is simple but has a special update which only updates the viewed column. And now we can work on our routes. We need a URL for login, create, forgot, change, and logout. Our home page will be the newsfeed area people will spend most of the time on. And if we check it out and put it side by side, here's what it looks like. I want to make all pages have a background image and be in a white box. So I'm going to do that in the layout file. I'll wrap the children in a background div and a white box. I'll also create a separate component which will display the basefoot logo. And then we create a page for our login route and insert the logo on top of the page. Now I've already created an input component in my Svelte intro video, so no need to reinvent it. So I'll take it from that app and put it in our components folder. And then we can insert that on top of the login page to see what it looks like. We set this component up so you can put icons in between the tags here. So I'm grabbing a user icon SVG from Tabler. It doesn't float over the box yet, so let's go into the component and wrap the children in an absolute div and put it to the right. Then we'll add some placeholder text and copy it for a password. And in order to make this component take in a different type for password, we can just add it to the props and insert it below. Then going back, we'll grab a lock icon. Then add a remember password checkbox. Then we'll create a reusable button component and take most of the settings from the input since they are so similar. We just need to change the props a little bit and the attributes and the styling. We also probably want to be able to disable buttons in the future, so I'll add that to the props and the style too. And now we can insert that into our form. To spread these inputs out a little better, we can wrap it all in a flex box that is in the column direction with some gap. And I'll do the same for the remember password row. Next, we'll add the forgot password and create account links at the bottom and wrap them in the div so they can be adjusted the way we want with flex. For our links, we want them blue, so I'm grabbing the color from our logo, but while I'm here, I adjust the spacing around it a little better. We can go into our main app CSS Tailwind file and add the link CSS here so it applies to everything. I also want the text in the site to not be completely black, but a little dark gray. But after that, we had some problems with the gray overriding everything now, so I go back and fix the asterisk to a body tag so it doesn't do that. Then I'll change the white box to allow it to shrink for our login page. And now it's time for the create account page. I copied the login box, and while staring at it, I realized I don't really like how the logo header works. So I'm going to take it out of the white box and put it on top instead. Back in our new create page, I changed the link, the button, and removed the password checkbox. Then I play around with adding a header on top and centering the logo a little more. Now it's time to work on the form inputs. We'll get rid of password and make a div that will allow two inputs to sit side by side. For this to work though, we had to adjust our input component so that its containing div fills the full width. Now let's work on a profile picture upload area. I lay out the general positions of everything first. We have a placeholder for the image in a circle. In the placeholder, a user icon if no image is selected yet. Then I add a file input box, but notice the styling for the button is gone since we have Tailwind. But we can go down to the style tag below and make up our own. We want it to update the image as soon as you pick one and before it even gets uploaded. So in Svelte 5, we can add a bind files to the file inputs. And up at the top in the script, we have a state variable that can be read when it changes. To do something with it when it changes, we can add an effects rune, and in there make sure the file exists first. If so, we create a file reader object and hook a load listener to it, and when that fires off, it'll set a background image variable to the CSS needed to set it. Below the event listener, we'll actually read it with the read as data URL function, sending our file to it. And if no file was found, we'll clear the CSS as well. Then down where our gray circle is, we'll set the style to be our background image variable, and also only show the icon if no image is there. Now if we try it out and pick a photo, the placeholder instantly shows the image for us. Now let's make the form actually submit by adding a form tag around it. I set the action to create, method to post, and include use enhance. Then we also need to make sure our button below is a submit button by updating the type. And here I forgot to add the multi-part attributes to forms that upload the file. I always forget that for some reason. And submitting it after fixing that shows a method not allowed error. And that's because we haven't actually made the server endpoint yet. Before we do that though, I forgot the rest of the user fields, so I add an email and password box as well. Now we can make the file that'll take in the form submissions, and that would be a page.server.ts file in the same folder. We export actions, and in there make a function the same name as our action, which is create. We then grab the form's data and each form input like this. And then we need to put all that in a user object. TypeScript here wants us to provide default values since they might be null. In our user object though, we need to have an avatar path, and we don't have that yet. To get that, we need to read the data from that input like normal, but as a file. If there was no valid file object, we'll send an error to the user. But if there is, I want to first grab the extension and verify it's one that we want to handle. Then I make sure the file name will be unique when we save it by creating a random number and inserting it in between the file name and the extension. Before we save it, I also want to reduce the file size in case people upload super large images. We can use sharp for that. Just need to install it with npm install sharp. After it's imported, I create a new sharp object, sending the buffer from the file to it. Then we can also resize it to 600 pixels. Say we want a buffer object back, and then return the data back to the buffer variable in the beginning. We also need a place to save it. It can't be the static folder, as the static folder only gets read once. If you add more files to it dynamically, they will come back as 404 even though they are in that folder. So I store my files outside of the web files and then stream them in as needed. For the machine I'm using, it can be something like C temp, and I store that value in a public environmental variable like this. We then can use the node fs function to write the file. But before that's available, I had to tell my svelte config file to use the node adapter. But now we can import write file sync, which is an asynchronous command. We can give it a path plus the file name and also the data to be written, which is our buffer. Then at the end, avatar path gets set to the file name and set inside the user object. Next, I can use the insert function we created in our user module and send it the user object and the new password. Remember, that can return a validation error, so we check for that and send the error back if so.
But if it works, we can create the session with our session insert function. And all this function wants is the user ID, and we have that in the new user object. I notice here that TypeScript is warning us that the user might still be an error because we need to return the SvelteKit fail function instead of just calling it.
Now the same error check for the return session. And if that works, we'll set our cookie to log them in. The cookie value will be the session GUI ID. Finally, at the end, we'll redirect them to the newsfeed page if it all works. Now to get the form response, we need to add it to the form props rune at the top of our create page. And above the header, we can show a red box with the error if an error message was returned using the fail function. The redirect we set will work automatically. There's no need to do anything to make that work. And here's the error message if we fail to fill everything out. And if we complete the form, we get sent back to the newsfeed as we're logged in now. If we check out the user table in the database, we do have one record, and here's what a hash password looks like. And here's how the file ended up getting named as well. We're going to work on the newsfeed box now, mainly the header so that we can get a logout link working. Like on the Facebook mobile app, when you click on your own avatar, I'm going to have it slide out from the right, and in there you'll be able to edit your information and change your password or log out. The buttons for that will be up in the top in the white box. I'll put a search bar on the left and a few icons to click on the right. The search box can be just one of our input components. And the menu icon can be the 3-line hamburger icon. We'll flex them next to each other, make the search box a bit smaller, and grab a search icon and put it inside the input. For the menu, I thought I'd put it in the avatar circle above their profile picture, but then decided to just ditch the icon altogether. But we're going to reuse the circle to make another icon for our notification bell. We can then put them next to each other by grouping them in a div. We're going to be showing people's avatars all over the app, so let's turn this into a component instead so we can reuse it. In this new file, we require a user ID as input, and that'll help us get the user image here in a bit. We can't just load the image from where it's at currently. It's outside the website in ctemp. So what I do is stream the image from the server by having a server endpoint that gets the file name from the server, gets it from the file system, and returns it as an image. And to the user, it looks like the image lives in that URL, but it doesn't really. To show you what I mean, let's make the image URL be /photos/the user ID. And before we continue, let's allow us to define a custom size when we need it as well. Now in routes, let's make the photos folder, and in that folder make a slug folder surrounded by square braces. This special folder name allows us to grab the ID in the URL and have one page that handles it. In this folder, there'll be a +server.ts file, which is basically an API endpoint. In here, we'll make a get function to handle get requests. We grab the slug from the URL, the ID, with the params. We grab the user from the database with our user.getSingle function. And if user was found and they have a profile picture, we read the file from our public path with readFileSync, which is a node function. And by returning the file as a response object, the entire URL will get treated as if it's an image. And at the end, we'll have a few checks to return 404 if not found. If we use our browser to visit photos/3, we can see Bob's profile photo, even though it really lives in ctemp. Back in the component, I remember that we need to use style to load the image and not class. Tailwind classes are only loaded when compiled, so if you dynamically add some while the app is running, it won't work. Let's make another user and use a real face for the profile photo so it looks a little bit more real. Here the same image is being loaded because we manually put 3 for the user ID, but if we change it to 4, we will see the new one. Of course, we eventually want to get the actual logged in user's ID. We'll do that here in a bit though. First, I want to get the log out button working, so I'm going to make 2 divs, one for the newsfeed, another for the menu where they can log out. Then we can make the avatar clickable by adding an onClick function to the props and converting to a button so that accessibility doesn't yell at us. On the page, we can make clicking it call a toggle menu function. The function will just turn on or off a boolean, and the boolean will control the div as shown below. I want to temporarily make them colored to see them change a little bit better. I also want to animate it moving, and we can do that in Svelte with the in-out transitions and an animation like fly or slide. It took a few tries to get it right the way I wanted, and I also had to make them position absolutely, and in the parent container hide any overflow so they didn't fly off the screen. I also wanted the newsfeed to take up the whole height, unlike the login, so in the layout we changed the class based on the URL path. When I got it all set up the way I wanted, I then converted the gray circle with an icon to a component too, so it can be reused, because in the settings panel we'll use that icon style for the logout button as well. For the edit account form here, it'll be the same as the create account code, so we can copy and paste that. We'll change the button name and remove the links, then grab the matching file and form JavaScript as well. At the bottom, we can move the file input CSS to the main CSS file, as now we're duplicating it twice. Here we don't need the password field. We'll use the future change password page to do that. And we can also make the email fill a full line now. Above the logout link, we can also add a link to the change password form in the future. I also have a blue circle logo to throw up next to the search bar, and we'll group them in a div and match the size to the other circles. For our form, it should already be filled out with the user's info. We can grab that on every request by using the hooks.server.ts file. We also need that anyways to force a login. This file is created under the src folder, and in there we call the built-in handle function, and this is the bare minimum function with no changes here. But in between, we need to grab the GUI ID from the cookie. We then get the session from the GUI ID, get the user from the session, and then save the user info in a globally available object called event.locals. In order to use it in TypeScript, we also need to define it in the app.d.ts file. Then below all that, I create an if statement that will redirect the user if they aren't on a login type page, and if the user wasn't set, we'll send them to login. Now that we have the locals, we can fix the avatar to automatically pull the user by ID. Right now we manually have 4 in there. We can also use it to fill in the form for editing your info. To read the locals from a page, you need to load it from a matching page.server.ts file. In here we call the load function, include locals in the parameters, and simply return it back. On the page side, we include it in the props, and here the whole load result is called data. Now we can fix the avatar to be the user ID like this. We can then go in the edit form and set the values of the inputs and fill in the avatar here as well. This one is a bit different though. We need to modify our background image variable to pull in our photos endpoint instead, unless the user chooses a new photo. Also, we can't forget to update the form action to update, and then copy the create action from our create form to the server code for the home page. We update the function name here, import the missing functions, and get rid of the password references. We then need to grab the current user from the database and set the image to be the current image if they chose not to update their profile. We probably should go back and return an error if the user wasn't found as well. Then we import a few more functions. And replace this with just updating the current user's properties. Then change the function here from insert to update and remove the password. Then at the end, we don't want to redirect, we want to return success true. Back on the form, we'll look for success true and show our toast notification in green. To use our toast, we need to add it to every page in the layout file. While we are here, we can also add our loader too. And there we go, we get a saved message at the top. Let's also add the loader when we submit and remove the loader when the form is successful or if there's an error. And there we go, we're able to update our information and including the profile photo. And that's about it for this video. We'll continue in the next one by adding the ability to create a post and upload images for the posts. And maybe we'll set up the search bar to find other people and add friends. But thanks for checking this out.